Some wars are remembered for the battles, some for the dates written in history books. But the deepest wars are the ones that never make it into textbooks. They are fought in kitchens that grow too quiet, in bedrooms where a son never sleeps again, in the hearts of mothers who survive the day their child does not. This is not a story about heroes on the battlefield. It is a story about a mother who lost her son at Pearl Harbor, and about a child she was never meant to love. A story about grief that could have turned into hatred, but instead became something stronger. Because sometimes, after everything has been taken from you, the bravest thing you can do is choose compassion. This is a story about loss, about forgiveness, and about the quiet miracle of love born in the shadow of war. Margaret Wilson used to believe that the ocean was a gentle thing. She believed this because her son did. Thomas had written it in his letters, how the Pacific looked endless and calm at dawn, how the water glowed pale blue before the sun rose, how standing on the deck made him feel small, but safe at the same time. "The ocean isn't loud, Mom," he once wrote. "It just listens." On the morning of December 7th, 1941, Margaret was standing alone in her kitchen in San Diego, rinsing a coffee cup she hadn't finished drinking. The radio sat on the counter, humming softly, the way it always did on Sunday mornings. She wasn't really listening, just letting the sound fill the house so it wouldn't feel so empty. Then the voice changed. It became urgent, broken, fast. She turned the knob up, water still running over her hands. "Japanese aircraft have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii." The sentence didn't land all at once. It arrived in pieces, like shards of glass. "Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, attack." Margaret shut off the tap. The kitchen felt too quiet, too clean, too ordinary for the words she was hearing. Her son was stationed there. Not could be, not might be. Was. She sat down slowly at the small table near the window, her damp hands folded in her lap. Outside, a neighbor's laundry flapped in the breeze. A car passed. Somewhere, someone laughed. The world did not stop. But hers did. For weeks after that morning, Margaret lived inside a waiting room that never emptied. She waited for letters. She waited for telegrams. She waited for the sound of footsteps on her porch. Every time the mail truck stopped at the corner, her heart climbed into her throat. Every time it passed without stopping, she felt both relief and terror. Silence meant Thomas was still alive, or that the truth hadn't caught up to her yet. She slept in his room at night. It wasn't something she planned. One evening, she simply lay down on his narrow bed, still neatly made, his jacket folded at the foot like he might come back for it. The pillow smelled faintly of soap and sun. She curled around that scent like it was the last warm thing left in the world. She told herself she would get up soon. She didn't. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Margaret heard the knock before she saw the man. 2 short knocks, formal, careful. She opened the door and knew immediately. He was young, younger than Thomas. His uniform sat stiffly on his shoulders, as if he hadn't grown into it yet. He held the envelope in both hands, like it weighed more than paper ever should. "I'm very sorry, ma'am." The words came gently, practiced, kind. She nodded once, just once. She did not scream. She did not cry. She did not fall. She thanked him. Later, she would not remember closing the door. She would not remember sitting down. She would only remember the sound her own breath made when the house swallowed her again. Sharp, uneven, unfamiliar. Thomas Wilson. 19 years old, killed in action. The ocean had not listened that day. In the weeks that followed, the country seemed to move faster, louder, angrier. Flags appeared in windows. Men lined up at recruitment offices. Newspapers shouted headlines in thick black ink. And everywhere Margaret went, she heard the same word spoken with growing sharpness: Japanese. Sometimes it was said with fear, sometimes with hatred, sometimes with satisfaction. She didn't join in, but she didn't stop it either. Grief hollowed her out. There was no room left for arguments or opinions, only absence. She stopped cooking real meals. She forgot to water the plants. She let dust gather on surfaces she used to polish every Sunday. Friends came by with casseroles and condolences, but their voices sounded far away, like she was listening from underwater. At night, she spoke to Thomas out loud. "I don't know who I am without you," she told the dark. The dark did not answer. In January of 1942, a notice was posted at the local church asking for volunteers. Food preparation, laundry, childcare, for the relocation center. Margaret read the paper 3 times before the words made sense. A camp had been set up inland. Temporary, they said, for Japanese American families. People were being moved there for security. Women and children mostly. Margaret folded the notice and put it in her coat pocket. She didn't tell herself she was doing it for any noble reason. She told herself she needed something to fill the hours between mornings and nights. Something that wasn't silence. On her first day, she stood behind a long table, ladling soup into chipped bowls. The air smelled of boiled vegetables and disinfectant. Children moved through the room in small clusters, quieter than children should ever be. That was when she saw him. He sat alone near the wall, legs pulled to his chest, his back straight despite the bench beneath him. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. His hair was neatly combed, as if someone had insisted on order, even when nothing else made sense. He was holding a small toy car. Its paint was scratched nearly away. Margaret watched as a volunteer passed him a bowl. The boy bowed his head slightly but didn't eat. He just stared into the soup like it might explain something. She carried over a piece of bread and set it down gently. "You should eat," she said. He looked up at her. His eyes were dark, alert, tired in a way no child's eyes should be. "I will later," he said. His English was careful, polite. "For who?" she asked before she could stop herself. The boy hesitated. Then he looked down at the toy car, his fingers tightening around it. "My mother," he said. "She hasn't come back yet." Margaret felt the words strike somewhere deep, somewhere already bruised. She nodded. "I see." She stayed near him after that, not hovering, just close enough. For the first time since December, the silence inside her shifted. That night, Margaret lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The boy's face kept returning to her, not crying, not angry, just waiting. She thought of Thomas at that age, how he used to sit at the table building model ships, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration, how he always saved the best part of dessert for later, like joy was something you could postpone safely. She pressed her hand to her chest. The ocean had taken her son. But somewhere inland, behind fences and watchtowers, a child was still waiting for his mother to come back. And for the first time since the telegram, Margaret felt something stir beneath the grief. Not hope, not yet, but the faint, aching memory of what it meant to be a mother. Margaret began to look for the boy every day after that. She did not tell herself it meant anything. She told herself she was simply being observant, the way a volunteer should be. Still, her eyes always found him first. Small figure near the wall, back straight, hands folded around that battered toy car like it was something alive. His name, she learned, was Kenji Sato. He said it softly when she asked, careful with each syllable, as if names were fragile things that could be broken if handled too roughly. Kenji, she repeated, and he nodded once, approving. She learned small things about him in pieces, that he liked apples more than oranges, that he could read better than most children his age, that he hated loud noises and flinched when doors slammed. She did not ask what had happened to his parents. Some stories, she knew, asked to be approached slowly. The camp was colder than Margaret had expected. Not just the air, though the wind cut sharp through the thin barracks, but the feeling of the place itself. Everything was temporary. The walls, the beds, even the smiles. Kenji wore the same coat every day, the sleeves slightly too short. One afternoon, Margaret brought a scarf from home. It had belonged to Thomas. She hesitated before offering it. It felt like a betrayal, or maybe a release. Kenji accepted it with both hands. "Thank you," he said, bowing his head just a little. She watched him wrap it around his neck, too carefully for a child, as if he understood the weight of what he'd been given. That night, Margaret sat alone in her kitchen, staring at the empty hook where the scarf had once hung. She cried, not the wild, tearing sobs of early grief, but something quieter, something closer to letting go. People talked. They always did. "You're spending a lot of time out there," a woman from church said one afternoon, voice cautious. Margaret nodded. "They're Japanese," the woman added, not unkindly, but firmly. "So am I," Margaret replied, before she had time to soften it. "Human." The woman blinked, surprised. The conversation ended there. Margaret felt her heart pound long after she got home. She wondered when compassion had become something that needed defending. Kenji stopped waiting for his mother sometime in February. There was no announcement, no moment of realization that Margaret could see. One day, he simply ate his soup without setting any aside. That afternoon, he sat next to her while she peeled potatoes. "My mother won't come back," he said quietly. Margaret's hand stilled. "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded. He did not cry. "I think she would want me to be brave," he added. Margaret swallowed hard. "So would my son," she said, surprising herself. Kenji looked at her then, really looked. "You had a son?" "Yes." "Where is he?" She exhaled slowly. "He died." Kenji considered this. Then he placed the toy car gently on the table between them. "I'm sorry," he said, the way adults did, but without rehearsal. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding born not of shared language or nationality, but of shared absence. The paperwork took weeks. Margaret had not planned to ask about adoption. The idea had arrived slowly, like dawn, first impossible, then inevitable. "You understand this may be difficult," the social worker said, eyes scanning forms. "Yes," Margaret replied. "There will be questions." "I know. And he is Japanese." "He is a child," Margaret said, "and he needs a home." When she told Kenji, she knelt in front of him so they were eye to eye. "You don't have to," she said. "You can say no." Kenji was silent for a long time. "Will I have my own room?" he asked finally. Margaret smiled through tears. "Yes." "And can I keep my car?" She laughed softly. "Of course." Kenji nodded once. "Then I will go with you." The house felt different with him in it. Not louder, not brighter, fuller. Kenji moved carefully through the rooms, as if afraid of knocking something over. Not furniture, but the fragile peace that seemed to live there. He asked before touching anything, before opening drawers, before sitting on the couch. "You don't have to ask," Margaret told him gently. He nodded, but still asked. At night, she heard him crying once, softly into his pillow. She stood outside his door, heart aching, unsure whether to enter. She remembered Thomas at that age, pretending to be brave. She knocked once. "Kenji?" "Yes?" "I'm here," she said. There was a pause. Then the door opened. He did not say anything. He simply stepped forward and pressed his face into her sweater. Margaret held him. And for the first time since Pearl Harbor, she allowed herself to hold a child again. Not as a memory, but as a living, breathing truth. Spring came slowly. Flowers bloomed along the fence line. Kenji learned to ride Thomas's old bicycle, wobbling at first, then laughing as balance found him. Margaret cooked more, slept better, smiled without forcing it. Sometimes grief returned without warning. A song on the radio, a uniform on the street, the sound of waves crashing too hard against the shore. Kenji noticed. When it happened, he would sit quietly beside her, offering the silent companionship of someone who understood that pain did not always need words. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he asked, "Do you think your son would mind me being here?" Margaret looked at him, truly looked. "No," she said. "I think he would be glad you're safe." Kenji nodded, accepting this with the solemn trust of a child who had already lost too much. That night, Margaret stood alone in Thomas's room. She touched the desk, the shelf, the small American flag folded neatly in its case. "I didn't replace you," she whispered into the quiet. "I made room." The room did not answer. But for the first time, it did not feel empty. The war ended quietly in Margaret's house. There were no parades in the living room, no flags waving from the windows, no radios blaring victory speeches at full volume. The war ended there in smaller ways, through habits, through trust, through the slow stitching together of days that no longer felt unbearable. Kenji started calling her Mom one evening without meaning to. The word slipped out while he was doing homework at the kitchen table. "Mom," he said, eyes still on the page. "How do you spell tomorrow?" Margaret froze. The pencil in her hand stopped moving. Her breath caught, sharp and sudden, like she had stepped into cold water. Kenji looked up, panic flickering across his face. I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't." Margaret crossed the room in 2 steps and knelt beside him. "You don't need to be sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "You didn't do anything wrong." She pressed her forehead gently against his. "You can call me that," she whispered, "if you want to." Kenji nodded, tears pooling but not falling. "I want to," he said. And just like that, the house accepted a new truth. The war overseas dragged on, but something inside Margaret had shifted. She still missed Thomas every day. That loss did not fade. It did not soften. It simply learned how to exist alongside something else. Love. Sometimes she imagined Thomas watching them. Kenji riding his bicycle down the street. Kenji asleep on the couch with a book open on his chest. Kenji laughing in a way that filled the room instead of echoing in it. She hoped her son would understand. She believed he would. Not everyone did. At school, Kenji learned quickly which children were kind and which ones had learned fear from their parents. Once, he came home with a torn sleeve and a silence that worried Margaret more than tears ever could. "They said I don't belong here," he said finally. Margaret sat down beside him. "Do you believe them?" she asked. Kenji thought about it. "No," he said. "I belong with you." Margaret hugged him so tightly he laughed in protest. "Then that's enough," she said. "For both of us." In August of 1945, the radio announced the end of the war. Margaret listened from her kitchen, Kenji sitting cross-legged on the floor beside her. Outside, people cheered. Cars honked. Church bells rang. Kenji looked up at her. "Does this mean it's over?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "It means people can start going home." Kenji was quiet for a long moment. "I think this is my home," he said. Margaret placed her hand on his shoulder. "I think so, too." That autumn, they traveled to the coast together. Margaret hadn't planned to. For years, the ocean had felt like a grave, wide, beautiful, merciless. But Kenji had never seen it, and something inside her knew it was time. They stood on the beach as the sun dipped low, the water stretching endlessly before them. Kenji watched the waves with awe. "It's listening," he said. Margaret smiled sadly. "My son used to say that." Kenji reached for her hand. "Do you think you can hear us?" he asked. Margaret closed her eyes, letting the wind brush against her face. "I think," she said slowly, "that love doesn't disappear. It just changes where it lives." Kenji squeezed her hand. "Then he's still here," he said. Margaret nodded, tears slipping free at last. "Yes," she whispered. "He is." Years passed. Kenji grew taller. His English softened into ease. His laughter came quicker. Margaret's hair silvered, but her eyes grew lighter. On the mantelpiece sat 2 photographs, one of Thomas in his uniform, smiling awkwardly at the camera, one of Kenji on his graduation day, standing proud and steady, his arm around Margaret's shoulders. People who visited sometimes hesitated when they noticed the difference between the faces in the frames. Margaret never explained unless she was asked, and when she was, she always said the same thing. "I lost a son to the war," she would say, "and I gained a son from it too." On a quiet evening many years later, Kenji, now a grown man, sat beside Margaret on the porch. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" he asked gently. Margaret thought about Pearl Harbor, about telegrams, about fences and fear and the long road back to hope. "Yes," she said honestly. "Every day." Kenji nodded. "Me too." They sat in silence, watching the sun sink behind the trees. "But," Margaret added, turning to him, "if things had been different, I might never have known you." Kenji smiled, eyes shining. "I think," he said, "that some good things are born from the worst days." Margaret reached for his hand, the same way she had on the beach years ago. "I believe that too," she said. The war had taken her child, but it had not taken her heart. And in the quiet space where grief once lived alone, something stronger had grown. A love that crossed oceans, history, and hatred, and proved that even after the darkest wars, goodness can still choose to stay. War ends on paper long before it ends in the human heart. Long after the treaties are signed, there are still mothers setting an extra plate at the table, still children learning how to belong in a world that once rejected them. Margaret never stopped missing her son. Kenji never forgot the world that took his parents away. But together, they proved something history often forgets to teach. That pain does not have to harden us. That loss does not have to make us cruel. That love can cross oceans, bloodlines, and even the deepest wounds of war. Because sometimes the greatest victory is not defeating an enemy, but refusing to become one. If this story moved you, carry it with you. Remember it when the world feels divided. Remember it when anger feels easier than understanding. And remember this: even after the darkest wars, goodness can still choose to stay.